Well, I'll just introduce as people are still coming in, I'll just go ahead and introduce myself. And I assume everybody on the Zoom call know one another, at least virtually. Um, my name is Stacy Aviva Flint, and I'm a member of Har Zion, but I live in Colorado as of about 4 months ago. Um, I actually converted with Rabbi Glick at Har Zion, and my children went to Hebrew school there, and were B'nai Mitzvah at um, at Har Zion. They were Madrachim in the Hebrew school. In fact, when I came out to Colorado and had a socially distanced Shabbat meal with one of the congregants here, realized that his mother is Miss Thea Cook, and who's a teacher in our Hebrew school, and my kids were the Madrachim for Miss Miss Cook. So it was like, oh my goodness, Jewish geography. Um, here in Colorado, I'm the executive director of Congregation Boneh Shalom, which is a conservative synagogue here in Boulder with about 200 families. And we have a Hebrew school as well. Everything here, of course, is virtual. Right now, we have a very robust virtual programming, prayers and classes. Um, and that's the rabbi leads, and then we have a lot of lay leaders here who lead ritual services, who lead classes. But I still keep in touch with Har Zion. On the board, still at Har Zion, and I just love the community. And so I'm honored today to spend time with my friends and family, and to talk about diversity in the Jewish community and how it's such an important value to being Jewish and learning new things, and learning how diverse our cultures are, and how we really have picked up the flavor of communities and languages and cultures all over the world, and um, made them Jewish in their own way. So today, that's what we're going to talk about. Today, what we hope to learn in today's class is we're going to understand a variety of Jewishness, and that includes an exploration of the many geographic origins, the very linguistic origins, ethnic and religious diversity. And then we're going to look at how some different ideologies of the modern Jewish denominations developed and how they play out in our modern world. And then we're going to introduce the concept of mitzvah and halakha as a way to examine Jewish diversity. So, our objective is that at the end of this class, you will understand the basic major groupings of the Jewish people based on geographic, language, and cultural. You'll understand some of the major Jewish denominations and their philosophical and historical origins, and then some of the practical differences that play out in our contemporary practices. You'll gain an appreciation for religious pluralism and why it's an important Jewish value. And then you'll be able to reflect on where you fit in the Jewish religious and cultural spectrum. And that can change over time. It doesn't have to stay the same. Some of the key vocabulary that we will discuss today are Ashkenazi, Sephardic, Mizrahi, conservative, and that does not mean political ideology, Reform, Orthodox, Reconstructionist, Renewal, non denominational and post denominational, Halacha, and Minhag. So those are the things that will be learning today. Any questions before I start going into some of the material? Any questions that you kind of want to put in the parking lot so that we can pick it up and make sure that we address it. Maybe it's a question that's been stirring around. You're like, oh, I always wanted to ask this. And maybe this is the class we can get those questions answered in. Anybody have a question we want to make sure that we get addressed today in diversity? Well, if you think of something, put it in the chat or raise your hand so that we can weave that in. The first thing that we're going to do today is we're going to do something that's a little interesting. If you have a pen and paper, because it's not Shabbos, so you can write. I want you to do a very interesting exercise, and it's called Draw a Jew. Now, I know that might sound weird, but I'm going to ask you to do it. When you think of a Jew, a Jewish person, what comes to mind, and then draw that. And then we're going to share our drawings with one another and tell us why you think it's Jewish. So I'm going to give us a few minutes to do that. Okay. Would anyone like to share their photo and why? What elements make it Jewish to them? Judy, you're muted. You want to unmute yourself?
Okay, so curly hair. I keep a bagel and a book.
Okay. Okay. And what made you think of that?
What?
Those
Curly
things.
hair?
What?
I don't know. They seem Jewish to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, Yochanan.
Well, I'm actually taking notes on like my iPad with an Apple Pen, so I actually went to Google Images.
Great. You can share your screen if you want to.
Well, I'm on my computer, but I'm taking notes on my iPad. I took a weird approach. So well, I didn't grow up Jewish, but my family is from East Germany. So like the first Jew like I encountered, like I didn't know him personally, obviously, was Marx. So I just searched my photo library and found a picture of Marx, Jew. Then we're also learning about the same topic in like a Jewish culture and history class, like diversity in Judaism. So I also found like just a picture of a Hasidic man, and then I also found woman wearing tefillin. So those are the three pictures that I just like thought of first of all. So those are just the three pictures that came to mind first. So
great, thank you. And I like how you just put in there how that while you didn't know anyone initially who was Jewish, what you saw first of all kind of really imprinted in your mind. Yeah.
My conception has grown since then, obviously.
Yeah.
I'm Jewish now, and
right, exactly.
That was the first one. So
yeah. Anyone else want to share?
There you go.
Okay, Justin. Okay, great. Tell us about your drawing.
It's just a person with wearing a kippah and a talit. So
Okay.
mainly because Jews can look like anybody and everybody, and the only things I think that would really make one religiously Jewish would be, the religious symbols of a kippah and a talit.
Cool. Carol Flank, I think I saw you put up a picture. You want to unmute yourself to put up your picture?
So I drew a family. When I was a kid growing up, this would be my definition of a Jewish family. We have family, mom and dad and two kids, and they have their book, as well as a to-do list of what they need to do to tikkun olam, to kind of take care of the world. So I'm kind of on the same page as Judy there with my book. And they weren't very diverse. They weren't diverse.
Does anyone else want to share their picture or their thinking?
Yeah, when I think of a Jew, it's a very simple picture: the black hat and the payas.
And explain to people what payas is.
What?
Explain to people what payas or piyot are.
Among the Orthodox, they think it's let the sides of the hair grow long, and you see the kids with the curls hanging down the sides of the boys with the curls hanging down.
The boys.
The boys, yes.
Not the girls, the boys.
Hanging down the sides in front of their ears. And the black hats, which the Hasidim wear. Very stereotypical. Most Jews don't look like that, but when you say, what does a Jew look like? That's what most people think of, I think.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the common themes that I noticed among the different pictures were the religious symbols. There were a lot of kippot. There were a lot of ritual garments, talis or talit on people, the black hat. In Yochanan's picture, you saw the tefillin. So ritual garments on the person. So in some of the pictures, it wasn't what the person looked like, but what they were wearing or what the religious symbolism on them was. And then some people, Charles, did you want to say something?
No, I was going to mention that I was about to draw something.
Oh, okay.
But I didn't, because one of the other persons said, well, this is sort of typical. And I couldn't, from my experience. If I did that, I would say I'm stereotyping things and some symbols. And through my life experience, I've met people and I've been to other places, and it covers a broad spectrum of people. And the symbols are people are much more, shall I say, in quotation marks, observant. because of those symbols, you would think. But I've met so many other people I didn't even know or were Jewish, or I thought were, and they weren't. And their qualities and their characteristics and some of they clearly reflected to me some of the principal tenets of our basic objectives or practices of our faith, and not necessarily ritual practices, but our philosophy of life and how we treat other people. So I just couldn't say, well, I would fall into this trap that so many people do, of stereotyping a Jew. And so I'm doing it to myself. It doesn't seem to, I said, that wouldn't be productive for me to even do. I mean, it wouldn't really represent how I feel.
Excellent, excellent. And I think that's kind of the point of the exercise, is
Exactly.
to see what have we been fed from society on what a Jewish person looks like or wears, and then how is that, what is the true reality? And I think you bring up a great point that there's so many inner qualities in the way people behave and treat their fellow human being that are Jewish, and you can't draw that because it's a way of being, not a way of looking. And so I really appreciate that.
You know, I just recalling a friend of mine. I've known him before we were bar mitzvah in the same synagogue on the north side of Chicago. And that is you don't want to know how long ago, well over 60 years ago. So I'm giving away my age. And he's still a member of this of Har Zion. I lost track of him for close to 40 years, and I found him through Har Zion again. But he doesn't practice Judaism as I understand what he does in his family now, but his basic principles still reflect that in what he does and what he's active in. I'm not going to go into what he does. He may want to be discreet, but he's very prominent in political activities, and he's always promoting things to benefit the community and the country. And when his wife was with us, she as well, and the family, but they weren't in any way, they're very distant from practicing Judaism right now, but still those core values are still there that we both learned from our parents and our, shall I say, very elementary teaching, the things we learned at when we were going to the same Hebrew school class in the afternoons every week for years. Mm-hmm. So it's still there.
Excellent.
So I couldn't testify him that way.
Excellent. So we're learning that for some people, what a Jew looks like is outward or ritual or observance. And we learn also too that for some people, what a Jew looks like is how they move and what values that they bring into the world. And it's not necessarily it's not necessarily religious all the time, but it's ethics can be.
So ethics is not something that one would be, as a Jew we follow a certain set of ethics.
Musar, I would think of something like a musar is kind of like ethics, or, you know, it's a Jewish discipline called musar that you probably know of, and some people call that ethics. You don't necessarily have to be religious to have those values or those ethics or those disciplines even.
Right. Just tell Carol I lived just slightly north of her, about a mile or two.
Cool. So something else that I noticed, and we probably all noticed in the pictures, and Carol brought it to mind, and even in Yochanan's picture, the diversity of the culture or the ethnicity of the Jews that we drew were mostly European or Ashkenazi um, outwardly reflecting. And so, just to be honest, most people, when they think of a Jew, thinks of someone who is white or European looking. So that's something that people sometimes within our own community think, let alone those outside of the community will look and think, this is what a Jewish person looks like physically. And so I think in we all have that understanding that a Jew can look like anything religiously. There's a multiplicity of practices. There's a multiplicity of ethnicities, thoughts. You have secular Jews who don't practice any, like Charles was saying, his friend sounds like he is secular, but the values that he holds and the things that he does in this world, you can connect them to Jewish principles and wisdom that are older than all of us. So great. Anything else that anyone wants to add about that exercise? And I love Charles, what you said about how that it just didn't feel right to draw it. That there was just, you just understood intrinsically that there was just so much stereotyping that you just couldn't do it. So I appreciate that. Anything else? Yeah, Yochanan.
Well, I just wanted to mention that like one of the classes I'm taking, like Jewish history and culture, and I don't mean to like rip on the professor or anything, because like he's Jewish and he's like a very like good professor, but the field is really Eurocentric. Like there's this like there's this long and fascinating history of like Jews in Ethiopia and China and India and like Southeast Asia that I was really hoping to learn from the course. But this is like we like 90% of the time it's like about Eastern Europe and like Jews in places like Germany. And and that was like connects to this like stereotypical image of Jews is like white passing. And like history in general is very Eurocentric and focused on white history. And that's something that I think that needs to change, and I'm hoping to contribute to changing. So
great. We call that now Ashkenormative, that a lot of, and even if you go to Israel, a lot of our brothers and sisters who are Mizrahi or Sephardi or even Beta Israel, the culture and the education system and history has really been Ashkenormative, really focused on the European Jewish experience. Yes, Justin.
So to kind of expound on Charles's points, I think one of the issues that makes it very hard for non-Jews to understand Judaism is that it can not only be a religion, but it's also a culture. It's also a nationality of people and like all these different things. So you're right. It's very hard to fit in one single box. Like somebody might be non-religious at all and still very Jewish, or, you know, all these different kinds of things. But, you know, and then with most of the, as you were saying, most of the things that people were drawing were mostly religious artifacts, I guess, you know, and clothings and stuff. And I mean, I would, the reason, at least for my choice to do that on a person was just because we're taking a Judaism class through a temple. So I chose to choose Judaism as the religion for what to draw, I guess, on these kinds of things.
Great. Wow, that's a great point. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for contributing to that, your thoughts and where you're coming from and just what you're noticing in the world, too. So what we're going to do now is we're going to watch a video from a young lady, and we're going to have some reflections afterwards about her video and what she talks about. And I'll be looking to hear as we debrief together what we're noticing and what it brings up for us. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. here. And let me make sure that my audio is working. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to pause for just a moment. Could you hear that?
I did.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure.
Not hearing it now.
Yeah, it's off. Like we can't hear anything, or I can't at least.
No, not hearing it.
I can't hear it either.
Not hearing anything. Maybe I don't know how to adjust things.
Can't hear anything.
Stacy? Stacy?
Yes?
Sorry, we're not being able to hear any of this.
Really?
Yeah. Sorry.
That's okay. Let me go to audio settings. It's
Would it be the speaker at the, if this is on a YouTube or something, the speaker might be muted there?
it's a setting usually in whoever sets up the what do you call it?
When you start the screen share, I think you have to make sure you select share audio. Maybe you
share computer sound. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me go back to the beginning and let's see now if it works. And make sure everyone's muted, please. Make sure you mute yourself because I could hear people talking. Just give a thumbs up if you can hear.
I meet a guy in a bar that's cute. He wears LL Bean duck boots and guards my bar stool when I have to go pee. He asked me out to dinner for the following Tuesday. I decline. Tuesday is Yom Kippur. I will be fasting. You're Jewish? Wow. You don't look Jewish. You don't act Jewish. And he says it in this tone that sounds like he's complimenting me. And I say nothing. I say nothing, which combined with a flirty smile translates to thank you. I say nothing because I got a contact high of someone's anti-Semitic crack pipe. I say nothing because somewhere along my life's graph, I've been swayed to believe that being Jewish is not too cool, not too sexy. I say nothing because I'm in a deep sleep, a snow-white coma, destined to meet my prince 5 years later in the form of stone in Jerusalem named the Wailing Wall. I place folded paper with written prayers for the dead in a nook in the wall next to a woman with concentration camp numbers tattooed on her forearm. Surrounded by fervent praying and bodies swaying, I am far more awake than I ever thought possible. I suddenly remember the exodus of the Israelites, and I walk barefoot from the wall in the desert to the bar and look for the guy with the duck boots. He's not there, but I have something to say to him. He's not there, so I make a soapbox and reenact the scene. Bartender, tell me I don't look Jewish. Tell me I don't act Jewish. Because I'm thinking, I'm saying, what does Jewish look like to you? Should I fiddle on a fucking roof for you? Should I humor you with oy veys and refuse to pay? Oh, because you know how we like to Jew you down. Jew you down, I'd like to throw you down. Because I walked here long miles on hot sand to publicly repent my sins because I almost forgot. 6 million died without having the option of giggling on bar stools. Almost forgot that concentration camp survivors are now a dying generation, that my children may never have the sensation of seeing in person. And if you must see me as that blood-sucking Jew, see me as that pesky mosquito that bites and sucks the prejudice right out of you. Just feel the need to say I can't be the only exception to the rule, just the one right now using my poetry as a tool. To follow KRS-One, I will use my gift to only uplift and maybe change just one heart tonight. I'm the Hebrew Mamita, long-lost daughter of Abraham and Sarah, the sexy oy veying, chutzpah-having, non-cheaping, non-conspiracizing, always questioning, hip-hop listening, Torah scroll reading, all people loving, pride-filled Jewish girl. Bigging up all people who are a little miffed because someone tells you you don't look like or act like your people. Impossible, because you are your people. You just tell them they don't look, period.
Any responses from that? Hold on just a second. Any responses to that video? Everyone's muted, where you got to unmute yourself.
She's right.
That's for sure.
Ed's cousins are blonde
Yeah,
and speak Yiddish.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah.
Well,
And,
most of my family are blonde. Many of them are blonde and blue-eyed.
yeah, oh, they're blonde and blue-eyed and they speak Yiddish. And Ed's uncle was sitting on a chair on a thing in the park with one of his daughters, and somebody spoke
And grandchildren.
and grandchildren, and somebody said, "Oh," in Yiddish to somebody else. "Oh, look at that
Nice Jewish
Jewish guy
and
with
they've got
that
chick
chick."
and they even have children.
And they even have children. Yeah. I don't know what
What does it say about prejudice about the nice Jewish people said he was a nice Jewish guy?
Yeah,
It works both
that's-
ways,
he
doesn't
looks
it?
like Ed. He
Yeah.
looks like
That's
Ed.
my uncle, my father's brother.
Yeah, he looks like Ed. So, but his
Mhm.
kids are all blonde and blue-eyed and don't
Yeah.
look like him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, you should have seen mine, and they were, and I'm you know, dark hair, dark eyes. My wife is the same, but it runs in the family from back to uncles and aunts and grandmothers and grandfathers.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've got a blue-eyed, previously blonde daughter.
Yeah.
Now we're getting off on a tangent, though. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
So what did you notice about the young lady? I mean, when she had the initial encounter and then when she had the experience in Jerusalem and she wanted to kind of reframe that experience, what were some things that you noticed?
That she's proud of being Jewish, and she wants to, instead of hiding, hide it, she wanted to flaunt it.
Mm-hmm. Is that where she'd always been, though?
No. Sounds like this was kind of a revelation to her, that there was something originally, something that you sort of kept quiet about and didn't bring it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kind of like that internalized oppression, that internalized anti-Semitism, that it was almost like, she was being flattered by someone saying, "Oh, you don't look Jewish." And then she realized that she had really kind of swallowed that concept herself. And she was making teshuvah, and saying, "You know what? That's not okay. I need to be proud of myself. I was participating in that." my own oppression. Any other reactions to the video or to the poem, to her words, the concepts? I love what Ruby put there. Been there where I did not know how to respond until it was too late.
Yeah. Haven't we all at our generation? I mean, we were taught just to be quiet and not make too much of it.
Yeah.
And there's many people, and even today in certain parts of the world, I've traveled through, well, worked a lot in different places in South and Central America, and you would be surprised that people just keep quiet.
Mm.
They're still living in the shadows. Now, I was in Puerto Rico a few years back. We were at a gathering of our Peace Corps group, and some friends of one of the members came up that he invited, and they came out and told my wife directly, you know, we're Jews, but nobody knows.
Mm-hmm.
And we still keep to ourselves and the family. Now, this is in Puerto Rico, maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's a reflection of what happened from its consequence of the Inquisition.
Mm-hmm.
So that's still happening.
Yeah.
People are afraid.
The young lady who did the spoken word poetry is Hillary Hildary, and she is of Mexican and Ashkenazi heritage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think something that many of you hopefully know already now is that the Jewish community, where we've always been, you know, historically diverse. I mean, our roots are in Egypt and Mesopotamia and Iraq and Africa and Europe. We've always been a very diverse people from, you know, millennia. But in the United States, about 1 out of every 5 Jews are people of color. So the estimates are anywhere from 10 to 15% of American Jews are brown or non-Ashkenazi in appearance. There are many Ashkenazi Jews who are actually of slave descent and Polish descent. I'm 10% Slavic myself. So you never know someone's origins by how they look. And the Jewish community is becoming more and more ethnically diverse. I know lots of African-American Jews who are from ultra-Orthodox and whose family have been Orthodox for 4 generations and who live in Crown Heights and Washington Heights and Muncie. And those people get, question like, oh, well, who are you? Or you may be here to take care of the kitchen or something. And they're like, dude, my parents helped found the shul or something, So yeah, you just never know. And sometimes you just don't know how to respond to people's surprise. So, anything else before we move on in the class?
Yeah, will we go over, maybe we can table this, but like also kind of go over the history of racism in Judaism? Because I know that's
That's something that we definitely can talk about. I will just say right now is that the Jews coming to America had a provisional white status. I mean, phenotypically, most Jews who came to the United States looked white, but because of the practices, they were considered kind of a lesser grade of white. And so one of the features of survival of the Jewish people have been the ability to assimilate into the cultures and the places that we have gone. And one of the things in coming to America is not only were you assimilating into a culture, but a way of thinking. And this culture in this country was really built on its early foundation off of the separation of races. And for Jews to come into this country and to really assimilate, you had to decide where you were going to fit in that way of thinking. And were you going to fit into that thinking of separation and segregation? Because that meant where you lived and how you were treated and what you were allowed to do. So right or wrong, we can look at the judgments that people made now and go, wow, that was really not cool or not right. But for many Jews, it was a matter of survival and a matter of being accepted as white. But Jews didn't get the white card really until maybe the 60s, because there were signs, and I'm sure maybe some people who are older and maybe from the South would see no Jews, no dogs, no Negroes. So Jews really were second class white people. And it was because of some political things that really kind of solidified Jewish people from Ashkenazi extraction from really blending into the normative white culture. And some people bucked against it, but money and privileges and threats to safety really made many people have to assimilate into that way of thinking. So racism is part of the American culture. So,
Well, I
so
wouldn't say you want to limit it to American culture. That's everybody still has, to me, a false idea that there's actually distinct races amongst the human beings.
oh yeah, we all know that that's pseudoscience and not real.
And
It's
so that's,
social construct. Yeah.
but everybody all over, mostly all around the world, still, so many, that's still, shall I say, a frame of reference for our societies.
Right.
Matter.
So something that Justin really brought up is that when we think of what defines a culture, I mean, you think of language, you think of custom, whether it's religious or other, dress, music, dance, but also something that Justin brought up is a way of thinking and a philosophy and social constructs. And one of the parts of American culture, I think that we are seeing now, especially in that we thought was long dead. Some people thought that we were living in a post-racial society, but what some of the culture of American culture has been racism and systemic racism. So it is it defines American culture. I think we're trying to redefine it, but yeah, it's something that's there. So let's look at the different Jewish ethnicities. And I think we touched on some of them. But when you think of, you have Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Mizrahi, Sub-Saharan Africa, India, the Cochin Jews, China, and then there's some Jews that are not even listed on here. But the first picture there, what kind of the guy with the strimel on and the long payas, what kind of Jewish ethnicity would you place with him for my list?
Probably Ashkenazic, Eastern European.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What about the middle? The middle, you see the group of people there, a woman's holding the Torah.
You got Jews or Beta Yisrael.
Yeah. Those are the Ugandan Jews.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, those are the Sub-Saharan Africa.
Mm-hmm. What's interesting is that there is I don't see a Beta Israel picture here. So what about the third woman with the glasses, the older one with the glasses? Where would you think she might fit?
I think that's from India, maybe.
Yeah, you don't know. Could be India, could be Sephardi.
Yeah, well, I mean, folks from India, they were came across when they were trading. Most of it was the Sephardi.
Well, Sephardi, we're going to talk about a little bit later, that mostly from Spain, Spain and Portugal, the Jews who were expelled from Spain and Portugal make up your.
Number of years ago, there was a family at Har Zion who were from the Cochin area in India. They moved out of town, but I think they had a daughter the same age as our daughter Emily in Hebrew school together.
Yeah. So this woman here, she might be Yemenite, she might be Mizrahi. Those are your Jews from the Middle East. So yeah, so you see that Jews have many different ethnicities. Some of the languages that are associated with those communities, we already talked about Yiddish, and that's usually in the European, Eastern European communities, Ashkenazi. Ladino, you'll see over here, your Ladino speakers have Spain, Greece, Northern, in the Middle East, you'll find some Ladino.
Romania.
Hebrew, right? Hebrew, you'll find, of course, here. Amharic, the Beta Israel from Ethiopia speak Amharic, although the language for religious practice, Jewish religious practice, is called Gez, whereas Amharic is the common people's language, but Gez is the ritual Jewish language of the Beta Israel, the Ethiopian Jews. Judeo-Farsi, so your Jews from Iraq, Persia, and Judeo-Arabic, again, from your Yemenite, your Mizrahi community. We have someone in the Har Zion community, Solomon, Dr. Solomon, actually speaks Farsi. I'd love to hear him chant Torah. It's absolutely gorgeous. I feel like I'm back in East Africa, hearing the call to the Arabic call to prayer. It's absolutely beautiful.
You wonder if that's how we were praying in Israel and ancient, more closer to. Think about it.
Yeah. If you hear some of the traditional Mizrahi prayers or the Moroccan Nusak, it will sound much more, their Hebrew sounds much more Arabic. So something else you'll notice is that unlike most other religions are in our denominations, our diversity is not only in our ethnicity, but it's also in our observance rather than theology. There's not one way of believing in Judaism. It really comes down to observance. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. So let's discuss the major ethnic groupings. So we already said that your Ashkenazi Jews come from Central and Eastern Europe, and they're primarily Yiddish speaking. Your Sephardi Jews are those whose ancestors came from the Mediterranean region, including Spain, Southern Europe, Israel, North Africa, and primarily Ladino. Has anyone ever heard Ladino spoken before? Sometimes actually Cantor Figa introduced Har Zion to some Ladino, the Ein Keloheno at the end of the service. Sometimes he'll sing it in Ladino and sometimes we'll sing it in Hebrew. So I really like it how he introduced that.
There's a really old Tom Hanks movie that is set in Israel. I mean, he's a young man and he falls in love
during World War II.
I remember that movie. Very nice movie. He
falls in love with a Ladino woman. And
with a Jewish woman and family speaks
and
Ladino.
Ed and I watched it and we said, that almost sounds like Spanish, but it's not Spanish.
It's sort of old Spanish. Being fluent in Spanish and my wife being from that strain. Yeah, it is.
It's a good movie.
Songs.
Yeah, it's a mixture of Hebrew and Spanish.
Yes, it sounds kind of like that.
I've been told it's probably very close to what they spoke in Spain in the 15th century.
It is.
Wow.
Exactly.
Amazing.
So it's sort of easy. I enjoy many melodies from there. I listen to it and it's to me it's beautiful.
It's very beautiful.
Yeah.
Your Mizrahi Jews, ancestors came from Persia and the Arabian Peninsula and were primarily Farsi and Arabic speaking. And then, like we said, you have your Beta Israel, Ethiopian Jews who common everyday language is Amharic, and the ritual language is Gez. Are there any other cultures or languages that someone wants to mention that we may not have mentioned?
I mean, there's different dialects of Hebrew. There's different ways of like saying the Hebrew letters. And if you read like the book of Judges, Shibboleth versus Sibboleth, that's where that comes from. Sure.
Yeah. So different pronunciations, and I think even between so if you the Ashkenazim pronunciations, you're gonna have the tavs turned to savs. You're gonna have, instead of like this week's parsha was toldot in Hebrew, but if you have an Ashkenazi, a more Yiddish oriented speaker, they're gonna say todos. They're gonna put an S on the end of it. Some people will say Adonai. Some people say Adonai. So again, the difference between the different communities and the pronunciations. So now we're going to get into some of the different customs and laws. So a custom in Hebrew is minhag, and halacha is law. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the differences between them. But before I do that, does anyone would like to give a definition of minhag from their understanding? What is a Jewish minhag?
I always understood minhag to be sort of the local custom, because when you talk about going into a synagogue and the way they, the way they do things in that particular congregation, we always call that the minhag for the local congregation.
Great. Do you want to give an example?
Like women on the bima.
Well, whether or not we count women for a minyan, that's varies from one congregation to another. And
allowing women on the bima.
Yeah, right. So that would
or
be an example.
Sit together or not sit together.
Minhag, yeah.
Eating rice over during Passover.
Exactly. Great. What about halacha? Anyone want to give a definition of that?
It's Jewish law. So like the 10 Commandments is just like halakha, although very basic. Then the more minyan would be like, what time do you say Shema, or when do you put on tefillin and stuff like that. So stuff that's dictated by law, and that Jews are obligated to do, regardless of their custom. So.
Great. Excellent. So a minhag is a religious practice that it's widely practiced by lots of people, but it doesn't have the force of Jewish law behind it. And it's not considered mandatory. It's just been going on for so long that people in a certain Jewish community do it. And it has a very strong ties people together, and everyone's expected to follow that custom. There's a lot of these different customs, like people were mentioning, like, you will have the Sephardim, your people, from Spain and the Middle East, who will eat kitniot, beans, legumes, rice on Pesach. And you have your Ashkenazim who will not. So you will have lots of potatoes, and you will have lots of meat, but you will not have any grain products for Pesach. Another thing that might be a custom that people have is that the different orders or the language of particular prayers. So whereas that you will have in some Ashkenazi synagogues, you'll have people who are mixing Hebrew and Yiddish, and you will hear, and then there might be different orders to the prayers. And in Moroccan or Yemenite prayer, they might start the prayer at a different place. There might be a different melody that's used to chant the prayer. So those are examples of minhag or custom that's particular to a particular community. And they've been adopted by people in that community because they've just been around for so long. And then later, Jewish authorities kind of sanction it and go, okay, this is the way it is. So the difference is halacha, or Jewish law. Jewish law is grounded in the Torah itself or later rabbinic rulings, much like Yohanan said. And they are explicit in the Bible. There's things such as the Ten Commandments, prohibitions on murder, idol worship, and certain intimate behaviors between people. And there are two types of rabbinic laws. There is a gezerah, which literally means a fence. So it's a rabbinic rule that imposes to a guard or a fence so that you can't get to breaking an actual Torah commandment. So there is an example would be using items that you've used for work during the week are prohibited to touch on Shabbat if you're following strict halacha. So there are some people who will have something called a muksar drawer, where you put things like your cell phone or pens, things that you will use for work or during the mundane week, you put in this drawer and you don't touch on Shabbat. And that is not something that you'll find in the Torah, oh, make this muksar drawer, but it is a fence that keeps someone who's really wants to follow Torah law from accidentally, picking up their cell phone or a writing instrument. The next is a takana, which literally means remedy or fixing. So it's a piece of rabbinic legislation that is enacted for some other purpose, so that we can reenact something like the holiday of Hanukkah. You won't find Hanukkah in the Torah per se, but you will find lots of stories about the Maccabees in our tradition. And so the rabbis enacted legislation or laws that said this is going to be a holiday for the Jewish people, and we will do this to commemorate this event or this significant event in Jewish life. So even though it's not technically found in the Torah, the rabbis can enact certain laws for all Jews to follow. Customs are practices and they're not legally binding, but the Jewish halacha are supposed to be, if one wants to, and if that community that they're a part of follows them, are mandatory. Are there any customs that someone wants to share from their family? Or a halacha that is meaningful to you? Something that was said earlier by Judy and Ed was about men and women sitting together. Is that a minhag or is that halacha?
Kind of depends, because the Torah says not to approach a woman during her this word isn't the most accurate translation, but it's the one that's used most, during her period of impurity or menstrual period. So some people interpret it, stay away from women, like in general, as like a fence around the Torah, because so they interpret it as halacha, but that also isn't really said in the Torah, so it's also might also just be a minhag. So the line is kind of blurred.
Great point. So I'll just name a couple of them. Ashkenazi men begin wearing prayer shawls only once they're married, while Sephardic custom is generally from a boy's bar mitzvah. And in many Orthodox synagogues, you will not see women wearing prayer shawls, but in many liberal Jewish movements, you will see women wearing not only prayer shawls, but even kippot and tefillin.
So is it mincha or is it halacha? Was that not the question?
The men and women sitting together, that I did ask that question, and Yohanan had his opinion on that. What's yours?
I don't know. I mean, that's just something that when I was living two buildings away from a Orthodox synagogue where we went for a while, men and women were separate. Other places where we went, they weren't. And as a young person, I never questioned that. There was just, that was the way things were. And so I was, quite honest, I was never instructed as to what is mincha or halacha in any detail at all. And I just sort of picked up odds and ends and definitions as I, throughout my life without really studying it to any degree at all. So that's why I'm asking you the question, because I'm ignorant. I humbly admit I'm ignorant to what extent you make that difference or that separation.
So
Great. I'll let a couple more people chime in, and then I'll give my opinion. Go ahead.
I would personally think it's minhag. But I believe that people that practice that custom are going to argue that it's halakha. So I mean, really, I mean, whenever it's up for debate like that, I feel like it's because it's minhag, because it's not defined in the Torah. So I mean, it became a custom because somebody was one going to argue that it's halakha. But if it's not directly in there, I think that it's by definition minhag. Personally.
Great.
Well,
Thank you.
a lot of halakha comes from the Talmud. And if you read the Talmud, it's a series of discussions and debates, and you can draw a lot of different conclusions from reading the same page.
Great points. So I would say that it is a rabbinic law. It is halakha, but it was something that was enacted by the rabbis to make a fence around actually breaking a Torah law, much like Yochanan said, because a woman could be in this state if you have a gezerah or this rabbinic law that says put a division, a physical separation between the men and women in service, then no one unknowingly could break that law, that Torah law, if there's a separation. So whether different denominations decide how they're going to interpret that, or if they really are going to hold by that, and we're going to start to get into a little bit later of in just a few minutes, how each denomination kind of interprets Jewish law in Minhag. But in an Orthodox setting, they will say that that's a rabbinic law, halacha, in order to keep someone from actually going that step further and actually breaking a Torah commandment of in an interaction with a woman who could be in some state of impurity. So again, as you see here, every one of us, almost every one of us, had a different understanding of Minhag, and every one of us has a different understanding of halacha. And you can talk, I always say, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. You can talk to different Jews who are from different cultures or different denominations, and you can hear a different way to be Jewish from many different Jews. And so that's one of the beautiful things about Judaism, is that just like Ed was saying, the Talmud is a whole discussion between rabbis on different ways of thinking about the Torah, about customs, about relationships between people, about our relationship to ritual practices. And it's really become part of our Jewish tradition to have differences of opinion and to discuss our differences of opinion. And if we didn't have those things, I think it would, for me, it would be hard to be Jewish, because you have to have all these different opinions to think about and to in juxtaposition against one another. And then the beauty of it is that so many of us can come together in different groupings and decide that, okay, we see things this way and we can all agree to practice together. And then sometimes you'll see us go, okay, we can all decide that we are all Jewish, but I'm going to practice this way and you're going to practice this way. And in a lot of times that doesn't cancel out who's Jewish. In some cases, people will say it does, but most of us today realize that you can have a relationship with another Jewish person who thinks and practices differently from you, and there be a profound appreciation for the other person, and even for their way of thinking. And that's something that's beautiful about our tradition. So let's start looking at the different denominations within our Jewish community. So our major denominations, and I'm going to share my screen here. I'm not sure what you have in your books, but I'm just going to share here. Your three big denominations: Reform, and then you have Conservative, and you have Orthodox. And then there's some others in between there. But your Reform usually you think of as your most liberal. And how do they see what we were just talking about? How do they see Jewish law, or halakha? They see it as a guideline, not law. Something that can inform your thinking or your way of living, but not necessarily something that you are bound to. Then you have the conservative movement, which is pretty varied, kind of in the middle. Halakha is not law per se, but something evolutionary, and that it can be changed over time, but with much thought and much debate and much study. Even within conservative Judaism, there are spectrums. There are people who are more conservadox, who really look at Jewish law as binding, but are really committed to egalitarianism, with the rights of women and the rights of other minorities, but feel very close to halakha. And there are some conservative communities that do not see halakha as binding. And you'll see many different people in the community practicing in different ways. I think in conservative Judaism, you will see a lot more Hebrew, and you'll see a lot more adherence to more traditional paths. In Orthodoxy, you will see halakha is one of the central binding aspects of the community, that Jewish law is eternally binding. It's something that came directly from God at Sinai, and it can't be changed. And it's something that must be adhered to in practice within the religious community synagogue setting, and also within members' personal living. So those are the big denominations. Now I'm going to start talking about some of the getting to more detail about those big ones, but then also get into some of the smaller ones. So let's go back to Reform Judaism. Where did Reform Judaism come from? So We know that from history that Reform Judaism appears in the early 1800s in Germany. And it's a response to the Enlightenment movement and also emancipation of the Jewish community, becoming actual citizens of the countries that they're living in, becoming citizens of France and Germany and so forth. And then the ideas of the Enlightenment and education and the sciences.
Mm.
And so the first Reformed temple was established in 1818 in Hamburg. And the Reformed community took a lot of their cultural underpinnings actually from the Protestant church.
Mhm.
The Reform's founding figures are Abraham Geiger and Isaac Mayer Wise. Your Reform seminary today, the largest Reform seminary in America, is in Cincinnati, which is my hometown. It's called HUC, Hebrew.
Union College.
Yeah, Hebrew Union College. Thank you. And that's where most of your Reform rabbis are from. You will note that in Reform Judaism, like I said, you'll see many aspects that you would think, oh, that's a Protestant thing. So you'll see clerical robes, you'll see services in German or English, you'll hear organ music and classical Reform. Not as much now. You'll see more Reform synagogues becoming much more traditional. But I'm talking about classical Reform Judaism. And a lot of classical Reform synagogues actually were trying to eliminate the differences between the Jewish person and the non-Jewish person. They were looking for more connections. And so that was one of the impetus to dropping kashrut and eating kosher or strict observance of Shabbat or strict distinctive clothing. They really wanted to assimilate into the normative culture that they were a part of. Anyone grow up Reform or want to give any tidbits from their experience? So in the middle, you will see conservative Judaism. It was an attempt to moderate and balance between tradition and change. So conservative Judaism developed along parallel tracks in both Central Europe and in the United States. And then you have in the conservative movement, Jewish law is binding, but it can change. And they want to look for change based on internal structures and values that are already in Jewish law to make that change. In Orthodoxy, that came also too in a response to what was going on in Europe and what was happening in the Reform movement. You will see that this was primarily among Ashkenazi Jewish communities, such as the Hungarian Orthodox rabbi, the Hatam Sofer. And his philosophy was Hidush Asur min HaTorah. Anything new is forbidden by the Torah. So the Orthodoxy really felt like that the Reform had taken things too far. Reconstructionists. The Reconstructionist Judaism is a product of thought of Mordecai Kaplan, who lived between 1881 and 1983, and it emerged in the United States in the 1920s. And the Reconstructionist movement was kind of like the first American Jewish denomination. Anyone have any experience with the Reconstructionist movement?
I mean, I've only been to one Reconstructionist temple, and it was in Portland, Oregon. So it was very interesting. Very, I don't know, I thought it was very liberal and community based, but I don't know if that was also because it was just Portland, Oregon.
Yeah. Wasn't gonna work.
And I think that's a great definition. And it's probably a great place. Portland's probably a great place for Reconstructionism. There's a very naturalistic view of God. There's a rejection of the idea of that the Jews are the chosen people. They really look at Judaism as an evolving civilization. In practice, it's closer to conservative Judaism, but in theology, it's actually more radical than reform. So Portland seems like a great place for a Reconstructionist. Let's see. One of the movements that is not specifically on this list that I want to bring out is Renewal Judaism. And moving to Colorado, I have a lot of there's a lot of influence here in this community for Renewal Judaism. Renewal Judaism is comes from Rabbi Zalman Schechter of blessed memory, who made Boulder, Colorado, his home for many years. And he really he was from a Hasidic background and really revived the mystical traditions of Judaism, that spirituality that a lot of Jews were looking for and actually sought and became connected with in things like Buddhism. And so you'll find a lot of Jewish people are Buddhist. And when Rabbi Zalman saw this trend in the popular culture for wanting to have those experiences, and the countercultural movement in the 1960s, where people really wanted to have these religious experiences and even guided by LSD and the drug culture. He really saw that there was an opportunity to bring Jews who had gone off to find their spirituality in other communities, bring them back to Judaism by showing them the mysticism that was embedded in the Jewish Hasidic movement of the 18th century. And so you will see a lot of singing, you will see a lot of meditation practices, you will see a lot of New Age spirituality embedded in Renewal Judaism. And I'm just going to share my screen for just a moment to show you a picture of a Reb Zalman, and he's here with the Dalai Lama. And in the background, you can see this woman, Eve Elson. That's his widow, and she actually lives here in Colorado. And I've gotten a chance to interact with her many times. And it's interesting how the conservative shul that I'm a part of really has taken some elements of Reb Zalman, and it's very interesting and beautiful to see. So let's talk a little bit about how each of these movements approaches our modern society. So when you think about our modern society, you think about, well, where do minorities or women or the LGBT community fit in? And what's the definition of a Jew? Well, in the Orthodoxy, they maintain the traditional roles of men and women. You will still see a mechitza, a separation, a physical separation between men and women. Sometimes you can tell how Orthodox a community is by how high the mechitza is. I was attending a modern Orthodox synagogue in Chicago for a while, and the mechitza was barely hip level. But then I would go to a Chabad, and the trees would be so high. These planted trees acted as the mechitza, and they were so high, I could not see the rabbi, and I'd have to peek through the leaves to see the men on the other side. Who is a Jew in Orthodox tradition? In the Orthodox tradition, a Jew is someone who was born to a Jewish mother or who went through a conversion process under Orthodox supervision. So yeah, that means that someone like myself who did a conservative conversion would have to reconvert. And actually, I was going through a Orthodox conversion right before I left Chicago. I was going through a modern Orthodox conversion that I decided not to complete. the conservative movement. The conservative movement is fully egalitarian. That means women and men have the same ritual rights. We count women in minions. Women can be rabbis and lead services. The conservative movement had its first woman rabbi ordained in 1985. And in 2007, the conservative movement approved the ordination of LGBTQ Jews as rabbis and permitted ceremonies of gay marriages. And in 2015, I believe, the conservative movement decided that kitniot, or eating legumes and rice on Pesach, was allowable. Who is defined as a Jew in the conservative movement is someone who was born to a Jewish mother or went through any conversion process, Orthodox or conservative. It is dependent upon the particular conservative synagogue if a reform conversion is accepted. And I'll just leave that there. The Reconstructionist movement is fully egalitarian as well since its beginning. It ordained its first female rabbi in 1974. Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan's daughter was the first woman to celebrate a bat mitzvah in 1922. And it was also the first denomination to ordain an openly gay rabbi in 1985. The Reconstructionist movement defines a Jew as someone who was born to either a Jewish mother or father, so they accept patrilineal descent, or a convert to Judaism. And the Reform movement ordained its first female rabbi in 1972. It began accepting LGBTQ candidates for ordination in 1990. A Jew in the Reform movement is someone who was born to either a Jewish mother or father. They also accept patrilineal descent or a conversion to Judaism.
Stacy?
Yes.
Actually, the Reform movement in Germany ordained a female rabbi around 1930.
Mhm.
Oh, great, great. Yeah, I just know of the United States, so thank you for that information. 1930.
So sometime in the 1930s. I think she perished in the Holocaust, but
Regina Jonas.
Is that her
was
name?
the rabbi. in Berlin.
Thank you. Wow, thank you. I love that. I got to learn something. What was her name again?
I think the name was Rabbi Regina Jonas.
yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
Anything, any questions about any of the denominations? Is anything that surprised you in their view of halacha, or their view of women, or their view of conversion? Anything that
How
surprised
about marriages, mixed marriages?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, mixed marriages. See, I had an Orthodox conversion because I wanted to get married in a synagogue. I mean, I wanted to get married in a house of worship. And so I had an Orthodox conversion, and we got married in a conservative synagogue. And I kind of resented it. So is there any denomination that allows you to get married in a temple that doesn't require both people to be Jewish?
I think Reform. As of today,
They will marry you.
The
The rabbis will marry you, but not in a temple. I don't
oh,
think.
not in the, okay, I don't know about the physical place. I just know that
And not
the
every
official-
rabbi in the city of Chicago, there are two.
No, there are more, but not even every Reform rabbi will perform.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of differences.
We
Justin,
had a hard time finding a rabbi that would do
Yeah,
it.
we got married in Denver, and we had a hard time finding a rabbi that would do
None
that.
of the Reform rabbis there would do it.
They said that, well, some of them said that they would do a wedding, but they would not do a Jewish
Oh
wedding.
yeah, I forgot.
Mhm.
By the way, do you know Rabbi Brian Fields in
No.
Denver? Okay, sorry.
I moved here during COVID, so I haven't been able
Okay.
to, yeah. Yeah. So yeah, the conservative movement still has a ban on their rabbis doing mixed marriages, officiating mixed marriages. Also, too, someone in the conservative movement who is their father is Jewish and their mother is not, would have to go through a conversion. My son was 11 when his conversion happened, and he did have to have a hatafam brit, so we had to have a moil. Although he had already been previously circumcised, we had to have a moil do the ritual. Yeah. And also too, this is something that's very interesting. Beta Israel, so the Ethiopian Jews, there was a controversy of whether they were truly Jewish. And so the Ashkenazi rabbi, chief rabbi of Israel, said that they needed to convert to Judaism. And the Sephardic rabbi, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef of blessed memory, said that they were Jewish and that they did not need to convert. So. And that stands to this day. I wanted to get back to something that Justin mentioned at the beginning concerning racism in the Jewish community. I believe that the different experiences of different people throughout different movements is very varied, but I do believe that, just as we discussed in the beginning, it's very Ashken normative, unless you're part of a Sephardic or Syrian or Mizrahi centered synagogue. I think that you will have people who are not meaning to be racist, but because they've just been steeped in a culture and a language from long ago, you will hear terms that are offensive. I have heard the word Sfarza, which in Yiddish does mean black, but someone saying that today, it is going to be offensive and on par with the N-word, because it is really, that is the connotation that word has now taken on, so that you cannot just use it. I'm just saying that you cannot just use it in its original meaning. So to say Sfarza to someone is very offensive today, no matter how much in the past it could have been a very benign term. In today's society, it is something that is not said. Yes, it's just
it was never benign. I can remember the way I heard it used when I was very young. It was never benign to me.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
No, it was never benign. And I know, because let's face it, as Jews, we can also have our prejudices and discriminate. And I know from comments within my own family, the attitudes that were there, and there were times that I just got up and walked out when I heard things like that. Because I found it offensive to hear it, even though it was coming from my family. And there wasn't anybody that we was considered of a darker complexion in the room. It was just, it was there. It was never benign. Let's face it. I wouldn't make excuses for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard people say that, but yeah, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah. Someone also mentioned thoughts on humanistic Judaism. So humanistic Judaism is actually someone basically who believes in being culturally Jewish, but not being religiously Jewish. In Israel, they're called Hiloni, and in America, they're called secular Jews or humanistic Jews. So some Jews practice all holidays, even Pesach, Passover, and Hanukkah, but with no religious meaning behind it. It's just cultural meanings. That one is, I don't know how you convert to humanistic Judaism or secular Judaism, but they do exist. Most people who convert to one of the three major Reform, Conservative, or Orthodox. Go ahead, Justin.
So curious, because I feel like secular Judaism is something that has been accepted by many Jews, you know, where they're like, you're culturally Jewish and stuff. But I've had trouble finding Jews that believe in secular Christianity, which would be kind of the same kind of thing. Do you have any take on that, where on that kind of thing?
Because unlike Judaism, Christianity is not an ethnicity or a culture. That's why it's mostly religious. It is a religious based. It's not so much, you know, culture. You can't say, "Oh, I speak the Christian language," or my homeland is Christian. It's
Mhm.
there's no common cultural.
Right. And
They're all religious practices, except for Santa Claus, maybe.
well, yeah, and I get that, but I mean, you know, that's where I'm, you know, talking about like the secular Judaism, from at least from what I've been able to like read up and study. You know, they celebrate religious holidays, but you know, in a cultural way, or they'll celebrate, or they might look into the theology or the philosophy of Judaism, but not in a religious way. And I mean, I think that is a very applicable thing to say, that, you know, although, you know, Judaism, although they're not doing any of the religious things, they're doing the philosophy of the religion or the holidays of the religion, but then gatekeeping and saying Christians or somebody could not separate the religion from the holidays or the philosophy. I feel like there's kind of a mismatch there, and I was just, but you've definitely answered kind of the overlying thought that I've run into whenever talking with people about that subject. So,
and as someone who was previously in a more Christian tradition, it's impossible to say that there's a unifying Christian secular thought. It's so varied and different. I always found it hard to kind of understand Christian thought outside of the religious underpinnings, which were so varied between the different denominations. A couple different themes, but again, they all run back to a religious principle. So I'm not the best. I'm just going to be honest. I'm a little biased. The Christian strain that I was in was actually very anti-Christian in its underpinnings. And I don't have a very strong Christian educational background. So I probably know a little more about Jewish theology and culture than I do about Christianity. So I that's something that I need to bone up on myself. So just being honest there.
no, I just figured while we were talking about like humanism, because that's also a topic that, you know, is rarely covered. So, you know, it's interesting just talking about.
And I think it's important to bring up, and I'm often reminded that I'm a much more observant or spiritual, religious oriented perspective. And so I like it when people bring up the concepts of secular Judaism and humanism, because that's not something that I will naturally go to. And I like being reminded of that personally, because it keeps me expansive and open, where I can kind of, you know, naturally go back to just the religious part of it. So I want to end up the class with kind of popcorn style. If anyone wants to go around briefly and state one thing that they learned or that surprised them or interested them in the class, or share where they kind of see themselves in kind of our varied Jewish world. And we'll end with that.
Well, one thing I learned is I didn't realize that Reconstructionists didn't think of Jews as the chosen people. And I must say that that is the thing that irks me the most about conservative Jews. Not that it irks me that much. It's just every time I read about Jews being the chosen people, I think it's very uppity. So that's what I learned. And we went to a conservative. We decided we were conservative because we went to an Orthodox and a conservative and a Reform when we were, actually it's before we got married.
Right.
And we went to the Reform thing and it had an organ. And I said to Ed, no, I mean, we might as well go to a church if it's going to be this. And we joined Har Zion in
1981.
80 something or other.
Before Emily, at 81.
Because they had a woman president.
And
Mainly.
Yeah.
So anyway, did you learn anything?
Well, for me, it gave me a little bit more structure to things that I had heard about and filled in some blanks here and there. And it's just very interesting to hear what other people's perspectives are. And it broadens my general concept of things. So I enjoy it in that sense. And I always learn something. Sometimes it's hard to refine, but it's part of my cumulative experience. So, but I could also add, you asked about experience between Reform and conservative. And I mentioned when we first started these classes that I helped found a synagogue in Costa Rica, and we were essentially had support from Reform organization, but most of us in one form or another were more conservative, even somewhat Orthodox. And we had people who were from Peru that were essentially from Sephardic background who spoke Hebrew fairly well. So interestingly, over the years, after we left Costa Rica, that drifted more into what is now almost a conservaform type of it's between. And even from the beginning, even though it was Reform and nobody was keeping kosher there, we all had on our kippah and we had on talis, and we had folks from Israel that participated with us. They felt much more comfortable with us than they did at what was quote unquote the Orthodox synagogue, which was really a synagogue that was founded by a group of folks who came from Poland, mostly in the 30s and the 20s, last century. And they were, on the face of it, somewhere between conservative and Orthodox. And it was interesting. And that's sort of drifted now, and they have a double affiliation. So there's a blur there. And I think we see that in the movements now between what Reform is doing and what conservative is doing.
Great. Anyone else?
Yeah, so I'm still trying to build up my knowledge, and I really enjoyed learning about Gazara and Kana whenever it comes to halakha. So, I mean, I really enjoyed kind of seeing that in the different denominations and how it plays across for different cultures and different people and stuff.
I think it's just so nice to think about all of the beautiful differences in background and philosophy and approach to religion that make up Judaism. It's really awesome.
It's always fun for me to learn more about it. And that's exactly what I reflect the same sentiment.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Carol, you're muted.
One big tent.
Yes, I love that. I love that.
Let's hope so.
John, is there anything you want to say? Good to see you, by the way.
Good to see you, Stacy. I learned too much to summarize, but I love hearing about the more, I don't want to call it fringe, but less central movements like Reconstructionist, humanistic. I think just when I visited Reconstructionist one Reconstructionist congregation, what is ironic is while they have a much more naturalistic view of God, they're much more intentionally theological because they're always translating into naturalistic language. And I just found that fascinating and a paradox. They're trying to make it in some ways less God-centered, but they're always coming back to the God question. So.
That's great. Thank you, John. I always love
Don't we all?
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that, even though I'm more personalist in my view of the deity, but I like that emphasis.
That's great. Thanks, John. Yochanan?
Well, I just think it's always good to review the diversity within Judaism, especially given I can't pronounce the word you said, Ashkenazocentric.
Ashkenormative. Mm-hmm.
Ashkenormative, I'll try to remember that, nature of like the Jewish studies and like how Judaism is viewed. It's not just a white thing. People all like it's more than that. So I think it's always good to just review that and remind oneself of that. So.
I would encourage everyone to look at Jemina.org. It's a site for Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews. And actually this month, November, is Sephardic and Mizrahi Heritage Month. And so I encourage you to look on there and learn about the Holocaust of the Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews that's not often talked about, from the Arab lands, and how 800,000 were dispersed from the Arab lands and from Morocco, and different things of that nature. There was also a Black Panther movement in Israel of the Sephardic Jews started their own Black Panther movement, political and social movement. So look that up. Golda Meir called them not so nice people. And they actually have a sign, a street in Israel called the Black Panthers.
What did you say that website was again? I think
it's Jemina.org. I hope I spelled that right. It's either J-I or...
Oh, I see. Jemina. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So Jewish refugees of Arab countries, basically it is. Yeah. So unless anyone, Fran, unless you have anything to say, I was going to thank everyone and wrap up. Yochanan, go ahead.
I was going to ask you something after class, but I'll just wait till.
Okay, I'll stay on. Fran, did you want to say anything?
Yeah. To say, I grew up in an unusual parents, and I speak Yiddish fluently, and they would use the term Schwarze, but as you said, that purely meant someone who's Black. However, there were very derogatory meanings that often were associated with it. I agree, nobody should be using it now. The other thing is, my parents, we were conservative, but my father was taken in by a family in Canada who opened up the first Reform temple, and they came from Russia. My mother's parents came to Detroit, and they were Orthodox. So I experienced going to their synagogue where we did sit separate, the men from the women. But we ended up joining a conservative synagogue when we moved to Michigan, and we all sat together, which I enjoyed much more. And now a lot of my relatives in Detroit have started going to Chabad's where they sit separate. And my sister hates it, because to not sit with your spouse, when you're used to doing that, it's very upsetting. And I understand there's reasons, but I have a hard time with Orthodox because I always thought it was very chauvinistic. And when I talk to my friends, I have a few friends who are have become more religious. They'll say women don't have to pray; they're on a higher spiritual plane, or they'll give these justifications, and I'm like, we're all human beings, So, but I really enjoyed it, and thank you for doing this. Okay.
That's
Well,
for
thank
sure.
you.
And happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Same
I
to
put
everyone.
into the chat some
Okay.
people that you might want to look up who are non-Ashkenazi Jews of color. Sheish Rishon, who's actually African-American Orthodox rabbi. Michael Twitty, who's an author and chef. Aviva McCoy, her family's fourth-generation Hasidic. Alana Kaufman, Ashkenazi African-American group reform, and then philosopher Albert Memimi, who's from Algeria. He just passed not too long ago, and he wrote an amazing book, much like Ta-Nehisi Coates, How to Be an Anti-Racist, but he wrote a book called The Colonizer and the Colonized, an amazing book.
Yeah.
Mhm. Well, thank you all, and
Thank
happy
you.
Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Stacy. Priscilla, say
you.
hi.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Oh,
Thank you again.
bye-bye.
now.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome.
I just wanted to ask you, because you were
Sure.
talking about how you were undergoing an Orthodox conversion. And I've just been thinking about this. So I obviously converted with Rabbi Glick. Right. It just to think this has been rolling in my head for a while though. It's just my practice, and like I am like people like I am basically de facto Orthodox though, and I like put on tefillin every day, and it's very important to me, and I am Shomer Shabbos, and I always pray 3 times a day, and I have fake candles in my dorm, and I don't shave too, and there's a and I do go to a Jewish barber though. So the thing I've been really I've been really considering getting an Orthodox conversion. But the thing is, I do consider myself Jewish though, and that's undeniable to me. But it's annoying when like the Orthodox don't think I'm Jewish, and even though I am Jewish, de facto and de jure, and
Yeah.
like I was just wondering, and I know you said that you like go to Chabad, or you went to Chabad and you were going to get an Orthodox conversion and you backed out of it. I was just wondering if you had like any input into my situation.
It is a
Sorry.
couple. No,
Another
you're
thing
good.
was that I don't want to feel like I'm dissing on Rabbi Glick.
Oh,
So-
no. Rabbi Glick is amazing. I mean, he grew up Orthodox. His father's an Orthodox rabbi. So I really feel good about my conversion with him. I think everyone's situation is unique. I had a unique situation where I originally wanted to convert Orthodox, but I was married to someone who was not going to convert. And I had children who were 11 and 14 at the time. And I knew that I could not convince my whole family to be Orthodox. And so to be Jewish, I was going to have a conservative conversion where I could take my children and myself. So it was a personal, strategic move so that I could try to keep my family intact as much as possible, yet be as Jewish as I wanted to be. Because working with Rabbi Glick, he knew how I wanted to practice, and so when I was there, I was Shomer Shabbos. I always walked to synagogue. And so within the conservative movement, you can practice orthodoxy. I mean, you can be conservadox.
That's what I do.
Yeah. When I got divorced, I really wanted to reestablish myself and find a mate. And so, and also too, I wanted to, I felt like that community is day-to-day living, and not just coming to Shabbat on Saturday before COVID, pre-COVID, was kind of the all-encompassing kind of community I wanted to be a part of. And so I would go to the north side and I would stay for the weekend, so that I could be within the Eruv and everything. And it was a modern Orthodox synagogue, and they actually had a woman rabbinite. She did not lead prayers, but she she could give sermons, and she taught different classes. So I felt like that there was enough modernity there, different than Chabad, but there was still that aspect of orthodoxy. And I loved the teaching. The only reason why I stopped the Orthodox conversion was there were some things that I just did not want to do that were practical. Like they wanted me to move to the north side and live within the A roof. And financially, I could not pick up and move. And it was going to be a much more expensive place. It was going to be a much smaller place. I still had teenagers at home who were, I couldn't move them out of their school district. There were just so many practical things that I just could not move within the community. And then also too, I really found a partner who was, his Jewish knowledge was amazing. His commitment to Judaism was amazing and strong, but he wasn't tied into this box of of um, of Jewish practice that made it so confined. I loved how he challenged the rabbinic constrictions while appreciating the Torah commandments. And I really found that that was something that kept me fresh in my thinking and kept me new and kept me from closing in my blinders. And I really appreciated that. And he's a Kohen even, you know. And I really just appreciated the way that he looked at things. And I realized that it really matched the way that I looked at things, and that I can practice as halakhically as I want to. But to have that expansiveness, I need to be in a community that appreciates both those things. And so I find that in the conservative movement, that's where I can combine both of those things. I can be as ritually stringent as I want to be, but be as expansive as well, and hear women sing and see women do things. I decided that I don't put on tefillin. I tried it a couple times. It just doesn't feel right to me, but that doesn't mean that I don't appreciate another woman who really feels connected to that and who does that. Some women do not like the mahitza. I actually love the mahitza. I would not mind if our conservative synagogue threw up a mahitza, but they don't and they won't, and that's fine. But when I go to a conservative synagogue, when I go to an Orthodox synagogue, I'm going to go to the women's section and sit behind the mahitza, and it doesn't make me feel any less. In fact, it makes me feel like I can concentrate and that I can, just have a privacy and an intimacy. So it all depends upon the practicalities, if you can afford it, and if it works within your worldview at all times. Now, I've also told my partner, if we move to, I want to stop the recording because it's like we're actually being recorded. But anyway, I'm not saying anything crazy. But if I was to move to Aliyah, move to Israel and make Aliyah, I would complete my conservative conversion, because I think that as a woman of color, and also whose partner is a Kohen, for me not to have an Orthodox conversion would not be safe. I would not have the standing in the community that I would want. I would feel very vulnerable if he was to die, or if I was to die and not to have an Orthodox conversion. It would just be chaotic for burial reasons, for all kinds of reasons that I just could not stomach. And so I would definitely finish my Orthodox conversion if I was to make Aliyah to Israel, because the practicalities there would make, to me, it makes sense to do it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you gotta know what's right for you, and
because it's just been rolling in my head though, and you said you go to like Orthodox synagogues and Chabad synagogues. Is there an issue with Like they don't
No,
ask about your conversion.
no, but again, I'm a woman too. So being a man is different because there's a lot in an Orthodox synagogue. There are a lot more opportunities for ritual participation, and so that means that if you go into an Orthodox synagogue, you're not going to be able to get an aliyah to the Torah. There are going to be so many ritualistic things that you can't participate in. Whereas a woman, those things in the Orthodox community are not there. Except for the one that I was in, women on the women's side that could carry the Torah, and I was offered to carry the Torah one time, but the rabbi knew that I was still doing a conversion with him, and he told me not to do it, and I totally respected that. But for a man, it's going to be challenging to walk into an Orthodox synagogue because they're going to try to give you the ritualistic opportunities. And once they realize that you have not had an Orthodox conversion, you're going to be on the outside. And that's, if you really want to be participating in an Orthodox synagogue's ritual life, then yeah, it would be important to have a Orthodox conversion, or you're going to be on the outside. You're not going to be able to participate physically.
So like if I move to a town and the only shul in town is like an Orthodox synagogue, I can go there with no problem. But if I want to participate, I have to get the Orthodox conversion. Basically.
Yeah, you're not gonna be able to wear a talit. You're not gonna be able to have a aliyah.
They'll like stop me from putting on tefillin, or
they probably wouldn't stop you from putting on tefillin or wearing the garb, but you're not going to get, if they know that you've had a conservative conversion, they're not going to give you an aliyah to the Torah.
Because another thing is like so there's a Chabad at Minnesota. I'm at the University of Minnesota right now.
Oh, okay.
There have been times where like I actually had I always make Kiddush at my door. Like that's really important to me. So I've had to like go to the Chabad and ask the rabbi, do you have grape juice or do you have challah? Because I couldn't like make it to Trader Joe's and back before Shabbos. And he was like, oh, what? And I got really nervous because I had my name tag on and he saw my super Gentile last name. And he was like, oh, so tell me about yourself. He was like, oh, I'm just trying to be more observant. And I just didn't mention it, that I was a conservative convert. So I've just been wondering about that possibility. And the other thing is like, I've looked at modern Orthodox synagogues in my area, because again, my practice is Orthodox. I actually am Shomer Digia, and that's a recent development because it's easier to be Shomer Digia with COVID.
True. True. Yeah, I was Shomer Digia for a while, and I actually, and remember I used to wrap my head when I was married. Yeah.
So like right now, I actually do have. This is nothing personal against you. I actually have the door propped open with my water bottle for you could. So
Baruch Hashem. Yeah, you can be as Orthodox, as you want to, and usually I find that the Orthodox community is very welcoming of converts. I haven't had a poor experience. I'm sure that they're out there, but I asked the Chabad rabbi in Oak Park to sponsor my Orthodox conversion, and he was willing to do it. I just decided that I didn't want to be Chabad Orthodox. And so that's when I went to the modern Orthodox synagogue, and they took me on as a conversion candidate. I'm sure if you let them know, hey, I had a conservative conversion and I'm really interested in an Orthodox conversion, there would be, they probably would ask you a lot of questions, but I've got to go in a minute. My partner and I need to go hiking, but they're usually very welcoming. Yes, they do ask a lot of questions, but if that's what you truly want to be and they see that, they are very open and willing to help. And I've had nothing but positive experiences from the Orthodox community when I was participating and when I was doing my conversion there. Because that's something that I wanted. And so even when they told me, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, and I knew that in my conservative synagogue I could, I followed along with that because it's like, that was fine. That's where I wanted to be. So.
Okay, because I promise this is my last question. So if I do convert, if I do decide, like, do you know, like, what's the process? Because like I'm already like de facto just Orthodox.
Right.
Like,
They
I
would
do wear my
they would
creed,
take you they would take you through their course of study, whatever that is for that community,
and
you
like
know,
how long
that
would that
rabbi
be?
and
What's
community.
the cost?
You would have to do another Beit Din. But it would probably be much more rigorous. They would probably ask you like specific things to quote specific prayers to. I know someone in Israel had to explain to the Beit Din how to kosher a chicken. I mean, from killing it to. But they usually prepare you really well so that you can answer the questions. You might be able to say, hey, say this prayer from rote or whatever. So you would really have to be deeply skilled, but they would prepare you for that. And then you would have to do everything else that you did with Rabbi Glick. You would have to have a moil, do a hatafad Brit, dam Brit, and you would have to do another mikvah.
So would it be like a few years, that process?
I don't know. The modern Orthodox one I was going to go through, he said it was going to be about a year. And
You're also, so like, I guess the Orthodox expect you're in Orthodoxy, you're obligated to do that. You know this, right? You know this more than I do, that you're obligated to do less. So I'm sorry,
yeah.
I interrupted.
Yeah. So they would probably have you do some adjustments, like, do something, take out something on Shabbat so that you would, not be fully, completing a mitzvah until you were officially Jewish. So maybe you would pick up your cell phone just so that you wouldn't be, you would discuss that with your sponsoring rabbi would give you all of those expectations. So it's not something that I can say. I can kind of give you a general. You would just have to find that sponsoring rabbi who would be kind of your sponsor, who would kind of give you your curriculum and how long and the different ways that he would expect you to be practicing and observing, or in the little aspects that he would not want you to until you were fully Orthodox convert. So, and you have to decide which if you would be comfortable with the modern Orthodox or if you would be comfortable with Chabad, because modern Orthodox and Chabad are different. Your modern Orthodox is much more intellectual and scholarly, where your Chabad is much more traditional and old world. The pronunciation is going to be different. The Minhog is even going to be a bit different because they have their own extra things outside of even Orthodox Judaism. So Chabad is a little different than modern Orthodox. And then Haredi Orthodox is even more different. That's going to be a little bit closer to Chabad. But especially with you being a university student and being very intellectual, I would see you much more in the modern Orthodox community. But if Chabad and ultra Orthodox is your thing, then that's your thing. But that's going to be much more narrow and constricted. And they might even want you to move. And whereas modern Orthodox will probably let you stay exactly where you are and, just have some modifications. So, but I hope that helps. You can email me anytime. You have my contact. Feel free to email me. And good luck on your journey. I would be curious to see where you end up, but do you be Jewish how you want to be Jewish, and if that means joining a community that reflects that as well, then that's your prerogative. And I'm sure that Rabbi Glick and everyone would support you in that. Rabbi Glick supported me when I went to go get my Orthodox conversion. So yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, Yochanan. It's so good to see you.
Nice to see you too. Thank you very much.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.